Have you ever just stopped for a second to really look at the animals sleeping on your couch right now? I mean, really think about it. For the vast majority of human history, the ancestors of that exact animal were considered absolutely terrifying monsters. Today in this explainer, we're diving into exactly how we created dogs. Or, well, actually, scratch that. How humans completely accidentally created dogs. We're going to look at how an apex predator wandering around in the freezing, brutal darkness of the ancient world basically transformed into our ultimate companion. Picture the Ice Age for a second. It's unforgiving, it's harsh, and humans, we were definitely not at the top of the food chain. The crazy thing is, there was no master plan here. Nobody sat down and invented the pet. It was really just biology, survival, and honestly, a few dropped scraps of food.
To really put this into perspective, imagine the reality of life 30,000 years ago. If you heard a wolf howling at night, that meant extreme danger. You were small, you were slow, and out there in the dark were these pack hunters with massive jaws, incredible endurance, and eyes that worked way better in the night than yours ever could. It's terrifying. But then, flash forward to today. Out of literally all the animals on Earth, we didn't choose horses or cows or even primates to live inside our houses. No, it's the descendants of those exact same terrifying wolves that are now sleeping in our beds, detecting bombs, and sitting there patiently wearing little birthday hats next to a cake. I mean, there are over 900 million dogs on Earth today. So how in the world did we get from these massive, deadly jaws to dogs wearing birthday hats?
Well, it definitely wasn't an overnight thing. It was this incredibly slow, organic evolution of a friendship that took tens of thousands of years. Like we said, 30,000 years ago, wolves were just deadly threats. End of story. But as we move into that 20,000 to 40,000 year window, humans are living as hunter-gatherers, right? Constantly moving across these brutal, freezing landscapes. Then, later on, we hit a massive biological shift when agriculture is invented. And finally, by about 14,000 years ago, we see evidence of really deep emotional bonds forming. But here is the absolute wildest part of this whole timeline. It's not really about what humans actively did. It's actually about self-domestication. Yeah, wolves essentially started domesticating themselves before early humans even realized what was happening. They built the biological bridge between our two species entirely on their own.
So you're probably wondering, why on earth would a wolf ever approach us in the first place? Well, imagine that harsh Ice Age world. Most human hunts failed, and winter was just a constant threat. But at the edge of every human camp, just outside the glow of the firelight, wolves were waiting. Because humans, it turns out, are exceptionally messy eaters. Even when they were starving, ancient hunter-gatherers left behind bones and skins and partially eaten carcasses. To a hungry wolf, a human camp was basically just a moving pile of free calories. Now, in biology, there's this concept called flight distance. It's how close an animal will let a threat get before it runs away. The highly aggressive wolves, they'd try to attack the camp and, well, they got speared. The terrified wolves with a really long flight distance, they stayed way back in the woods and got nothing. But the curious ones, the wolves with just a slightly shorter flight distance, they realized that if they could just tolerate being near humans, they got free food. So by pure natural selection, boldness and calmness suddenly became huge survival advantages.
And if that sounds like a bit of a guess, we actually have modern scientific evidence showing exactly how this biological domestication plays out in real time. Back in 1959, there was this Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev, and he set out to test this exact idea using foxes in Siberia. And the coolest part is, he didn't train them. He didn't teach them any tricks. He literally just did one thing. He selected the tamest, least aggressive foxes from the group and bred them together. He just wanted to see what happens when you strictly select for a calm temperament. And the results were staggering. Within just a few generations, these foxes started acting exactly like dogs. They started wagging their tails, they were whining for human attention, and they'd eagerly lick people's hands. Just by breeding for calmness, he completely rewired their behavioral biology. But here is where it gets really crazy. That tameness didn't just change how they acted, it literally altered their physical bodies. When Belyaev bred those foxes just to be less aggressive, they actually started developing floppy ears. They got shortened snouts, little patches of white fur, and curled tails. So why does that happen? Well, biologically speaking, breeding for tameness lowers adrenaline and it changes their hormone levels. And those chemical shifts organically affect things like cartilage stiffness and pigmentation while they're developing. Which means those very first proto-dogs that were hanging around our ancient campfires, they likely started looking slightly smaller, a bit calmer, and just way less intimidating, entirely by accident. Long before humans ever decided to intentionally breed them, nature was already softening their features.
Once these proto-dogs were kind of just chilling around the camp,
A really profound mutual survival benefit kicked in. I mean, think about our limitations as humans in the wild. We are pretty slow, our night vision is basically a joke, and we are incredibly vulnerable when we fall asleep. But wolves? Their senses of smell and hearing were essentially a superpower for a human tribe. They could hear things we couldn't even dream of hearing, smell predators from miles away, and track prey with just pinpoint accuracy. Having a proto-dog hanging around was like having a living, biological alarm system. If a bear wandered too close or strangers appeared in the dark, the dogs reacted first. This partnership meant both species could finally sleep soundly, and it accelerated our relationship so dramatically that dogs became the very first domesticated animal in human history.
As this partnership got stronger, another unbelievable biological leap happened, which we call the starch shift. Eventually, humans invented agriculture. We settled down, we started growing wheat and grains, and our diets completely transformed. But a wild carnivore's digestive system, that's not going to cut it if you're trying to live off human farming scraps. So, to stay right there by our side, dogs fundamentally evolved at the DNA level. They literally developed multiple copies of the gene responsible for starch digestion, something wild wolves just don't have. So it wasn't just them getting used to new food, it was a total evolutionary rewrite. Their internal biology transformed specifically so they could keep eating our leftovers. How amazing is that?
But they didn't just adapt to our food, they actually adapted to our brain chemistry. You see, when humans and dogs make eye contact, both species release a hormone called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is deeply involved in the emotional bonding between human parents and their babies. And what's really interesting here is that wild wolves absolutely do not do this naturally with humans. Dogs organically evolved this specific chemical reaction. Just think about that for a second. It is a literal interspecies chemical feedback loop. When your dog is staring at you lovingly from across the room, it's not some random behavior. Evolution literally shaped their biology to emotionally connect with the human brain.
And to make sure they triggered that precise chemical response in us, they developed the ultimate tool, puppy dog eyes. It turns out, dogs actually evolved these specific, emotionally expressive facial muscles around their eyes that wolves simply don't use in the same way. Why? Well, because early humans were instinctively way more likely to care for, feed, and protect animals that looked expressive and vulnerable. Animals that kind of reminded us of human infants. By developing these incredibly expressive faces, dogs basically hacked our human biology. They practically guaranteed that we would fall in love with them, and by doing that, they secured their own survival right alongside ours.
Now, it is important to point out that this domestication process also came with a pretty steep cost, especially later on when humans decided to take the reins of evolution away from nature. In our modern quest to create very specific looks for different breeds, we started prioritizing aesthetics over biological health. Because of intense, intentional human breeding, modern dogs have actually lost a lot of the traits that made them such healthy, wild survivors in the first place. We now see breeds suffering from severe health problems. You have pugs that constantly struggle to breathe, dachshunds that are prone to really debilitating spinal issues, and bulldogs with heads so large they sometimes can't even give birth naturally. It's a stark, objective reminder of the physical toll our direct interference has taken on their ancient biology. Yet even with all of that human breeding and all the physical changes, you still see traces of the wild predator every single day, probably without even realizing it. When your dog spins around in circles 3 or 4 times before lying down on the rug? They are literally echoing ancient wolves flattening tall grass to make a safe bed. Howling at a passing siren, burying a toy or a bone in the yard for later, or twitching their paws in their sleep, those are pure survival instincts from tens of thousands of years ago, just bubbling right back up to the surface. Hidden inside every tiny chihuahua and every fluffy husky is the lingering ancient shadow of an Ice Age predator. And over time, that ancient survival connection evolved into something profoundly beautiful. Let me take you back to a really remarkable archaeological discovery made in Germany. Researchers uncovered a grave from around 14,000 years ago. Inside, they found a man, a woman, and a dog buried very carefully right beside them. Forensic evidence showed that this specific dog had actually suffered from a severe illness as a puppy, but it survived for weeks or maybe even months afterward. Which means these Ice Age humans, who were struggling to survive in literally one of the harshest environments imaginable, actively chose to spend their precious food, time, and energy intentionally nursing a sick puppy back to health. When archaeologists look at that level of care, they realize that, well, that's not just usefulness anymore. That is attachment. That is friendship. That's maybe even love. It really is just an incredible journey. All because a few cautious wolves decided to creep just a little bit closer in the dark. Evolution slowly turned fear into the greatest partnership in the history of our species. So, When your best friend falls asleep near you tonight, will you see the shadow of the Ice Age predator hidden inside them? They might not know that their comfortable life began tens of thousands of years ago with a few scraps dropped beside a campfire, but now you do. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the incredible world around you.